now is Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. Secretary Bessent, welcome back to Meet the Press.
Good morning, Kristen. Good to be with you.
It's great to have you here. Thank you for being here in person. Let's start right there. President Trump threatening to impose steep tariffs against some of America's closest European and NATO allies. The leaders of Denmark and Greenland say bluntly, Greenland is not for sale. What makes President Trump think it is?
Kristen, if we look for years, for over a century, American presidents have wanted to acquire Greenland, and what we can see is that Greenland is essential to the U.S. national security. We're building the Golden Dome, the missile system, and look, President Trump is being strategic. He's looking beyond this year. He's looking beyond next year to what could happen for a battle in the Arctic. We are not going to outsource our national security. We are not going to outsource our hemispheric security to other countries. In Trump 1.0, President Trump told the Europeans, do not build Nord Stream 2. Do not rely on Russian oil. And guess what, Kristen? Guess what is funding Russia's efforts against Ukraine? European purchases of Russian oil. So America has to be in control here.
I want to delve into everything that you said, but I just want to ask you big picture. Is this a negotiating tactic, Mr. Secretary, or is President Trump serious about annexing Greenland?
President Trump strongly believes that we cannot outsource our security because, Kristen, let me tell you what will happen, and it might not be next year, might not be in 5 years, but down the road, this fight for the Arctic is real. We would keep our NATO our NATO guarantees, and if there were an attack on Greenland from Russia, from some other area, we would get dragged in. So better now, peace through strength, make it part of the United States, and there will not be a conflict because the United States right now, we are the hottest country in the world. We are the strongest country in the world. The Europeans project weakness. The U.S. projects strength.
But just very quickly, is this a negotiating tactic, Mr. Secretary? Is the goal to get a deal to have enhanced security in Greenland, for example?
The president believes that enhanced security is not possible without Greenland being part of the U.S.
Okay, let me press you on what you have said are national security concerns, particularly as it relates to Russia and China. Senior Democrats say there are no pressing threats on Greenland's security from Russia or China. The Danish foreign minister says there hasn't been a Chinese warship in Greenland for a decade. What evidence do you have that this is a pressing threat? Well,
first of all, Kristen, we have asymmetric information. And again, President Trump is being strategic here. What evidence was there that the Russians were going into Crimea? What evidence was it? Well, actually, there was a lot of evidence that the Russians were going to go into Ukraine, and Joe Biden said, well, just take a little bit of it. But what we know is that the U.S., that Greenland can only be defended if it is part of the U.S., and it will not need to be defended if it is part of the U.S. The president is trying to avoid a conflict.
You bring up Crimea. The president, as far as I have heard, has not taken military force off the table. If the United States were to take Greenland by force, how would that be different than Russia's annexation of Crimea?
Look, I believe that the Europeans will understand that this is best for Greenland, best for Europe, and best for the United States.
So, but military action is still on the table?
I haven't spoken with the president on that. And again, I believe that the Europeans will understand that the best outcome is for the U.S. to maintain or receive control of Greenland.
Well, so far, what we've heard and seen from the Europeans is alarm and outrage. In fact, they're, as you know, holding an emergency meeting today. And part of the issues, the president has already reached a trade deal with the EU. How can countries have confidence in trade deals moving forward if President Trump is prepared to blow them up?
Well, first of all, the trade deal hasn't been finalized, and an emergency action can be very different from another trade deal. We're in a very good equilibrium right now with China, but if China did something to upset that balance, I think the president would be willing to act. Same thing with India. We were working on a trade deal with India, but the president, unlike the Europeans, started charging the Europeans 25% for buying Russian oil. So the president leverages his emergency powers to do this.
I hear you saying that the deal hasn't been finalized, and yet it was moving toward finalization. Doesn't it undercut the United States' word by threatening these steep new tariffs?
I think it does not. What it does is it enhances United States security. And again, we have seen the Europeans are unable to push back against Russia. The U.S. is this war that never would have started in Ukraine, Kristen. We are going to settle it, but it wouldn't have started. And what President Trump is trying to do is prevent a taking or the Russian-Chinese action in Greenland in the future. So why not be strategic? Why always live in the moment?
Okay, let's talk about being strategic. The United States has a base in Greenland. I've been talking to lawmakers on Capitol Hill. Denmark has given the United States a green light to beef up its security as much as is needed in Greenland. Why not take that route? Why is it necessary to take over and annex all of Greenland, something that 85% of people living in Greenland oppose?
Well, again, and let's look back. Denmark has a terrible history with Greenlanders. There was forced sterilizations up until the 80s or the 90s. So all of a sudden, now that the U.S. has expressed an interest, there is this new interest. And again, the United States needs to be in control to prevent a war, and that we do not want to get dragged into someone else's war.
Well, but this is about the United States' relationship with its allies, NATO allies, again, reacting with alarm. They're warning that this move to annex Greenland could, in fact, destroy NATO. So let me just put this to you bluntly. Is Greenland or NATO more essential to the United States' national security?
Well, Chris, that's obviously a false choice. That's a
not from the perspective of European leaders.
The European leaders will come around and they will understand that they need to be under the U.S. security umbrella. What would happen in Ukraine that if the U.S. pulled its support out? The whole thing would collapse. That the U.S., Kristen, to be clear, since 1980, the U.S. has spent U.S. military spending versus NATO military spending. We have spent $22 trillion more than the Europeans have. That we are peace through strength. And the Europeans now are only trying to play catch up. And that is only through President Trump. President Trump believes in NATO, but he does not believe in the American people being dragged in.
Well, in terms of the cost that has been paid, Denmark has stood shoulder to shoulder with the United States, including after 9/11. In fact, it lost more soldiers per capita in Afghanistan than any other NATO nation. Apart from the United States itself, Mr. Secretary, does President Trump want the United States to remain a part of NATO?
Of course, we're going to remain a part of NATO, but what President Trump does not want is for a war to start and the U.S. get dragged in. Again, we are not going to outsource our Western Hemispheric security to others.
Let me ask you, broadly speaking, about the tariff portion of this. The president, as you well know, has justified his authority to impose previous tariffs without going to Congress by declaring national emergencies. It's an issue before the Supreme Court right now. We're all awaiting the High Court's decision. What is the national emergency that justifies these new slate of tariffs?
The national emergency is avoiding a national emergency. That it is a strategic decision by the president. This is a geopolitical decision, and he is able to use the economic might of the U.S. to avoid a hot war. So why wouldn't we do that? Same thing. That what if we had a national emergency coming with these gigantic trade balances that we had with the rest of the world? I've been in financial markets for 30, 45 years. Much better to be strategic, avoid the emergency.
You're saying it's a national emergency, but you're also saying it's a threat that's years away. How can both be true, Mr. Secretary?
Because you are avoiding creating the emergency, Kristen. What if during the great financial crisis, someone had raised their hand in 2005, 2006 and said, stop with subprime mortgages? But no one did. President Trump is raising his hand, and that is preventing the emergency.
Do you think the Supreme Court will agree with that rationale, Mr. Secretary?
I believe that it is very unlikely that the Supreme Court will overrule a president's signature economic policy. They did not overrule Obamacare. I believe that the Supreme Court does not want to create chaos. We have set, as you said earlier, we have set these trade deals, and it is very good for the United States. We are balancing our trade deficit. You look, Europe is being overrun with Chinese goods. There is now an emergency in Europe. There's going to be an economic emergency. The Europeans will follow us. So President Trump is preempting this. If we go back to emergencies, he put a fentanyl tariff, Mexico, Canada, China. Guess what's happened to fentanyl deaths? If that's an emergency, I don't know what was. October 8th, when the Chinese Chinese threatened to put rare earth export controls in the entire world, President Trump threatened a 100% tariff. And the Chinese came to the table, and we negotiated on behalf of the whole world.
All right, let me move to the Federal Reserve. I want to ask you about the revelations this week that the Department of Justice is investigating Jerome Powell and the Fed for allegedly going over budget in the Fed building renovations. Chairman Powell responded. He fired back at this. I want to play a little bit and get your reaction on the other side.
This is about whether the Fed will be able to continue to set interest rates based on evidence and economic conditions, or whether instead monetary policy will be directed by political pressure or intimidation.
Is President Trump committed to the independence of the Federal Reserve, Mr. Secretary?
Of course he's committed to the independence of the Federal Reserve, but independence does not mean no oversight.
But doesn't this undercut the independence of the Federal Reserve, that the Justice Department is investigating renovations? There are renovations at the White House.
The renovations at the White House are not the $700 million, more than $1 billion, $1.5 billion, the over budget, Kristen. And the White House, that is being paid for with private funds. If I want to buy a new chair for my office at Treasury, that is an appropriation. Just to understand, the Federal Reserve has magic money. They print their own money. So when you have no oversight, why not have a little sunlight? Kristen, I have called since last summer for the Fed to do its own internal investigation, and that has not been heeded. Not been heeded. And again, I don't know about you. When I receive if I were to receive inquiries from the Justice Department, I would answer them. They went unanswered.
Well, let me ask you, because Axios reported that you were not happy about DOJ's investigation, that you told President Trump as much. Axios writes, quote, a perturbed Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent told President Trump late Sunday that the federal investigation into the Federal Reserve chair made a mess and could be bad for financial markets. That's according to two sources familiar with the call. Is that accurate?
Well, you know what, Kristen? I'm not going to discuss my conversations with the president, but if I said that, I was wrong. Financial markets, stock market went up, bond yields went down, so the markets are the ultimate arbiter. So the markets are the ultimate arbiter over whether the Fed's independence is being impugned, and bond yields went down. I can tell you, we had two of the best bond auctions that we have had in months for U.S. Treasuries, so the market is looking beyond this. And again, maybe the market wants some transparency from the Fed.
One final question for you, Mr. Secretary. Some Republican senators, as you know, are threatening to block the president's nominees over the Justice Department's investigation. Do you think the investigation needs to be dropped in order for the Senate to confirm the president's next pick to run the Fed?
I think that will be up to the senators.
But are you worried that they'll block the president's pick for the Fed?
I am not. I think we have four great candidates. I think that they will be quite happy with either of the four. I think we will move forward. I believe that we will probably be hearing from the Banking Committee soon on what they would like to see. And again, that supervision and bringing in some sunlight does not mean coercion.
All right. Thank you so much, Secretary Bessent, for being here to respond to all of the breaking developments overnight. We really appreciate it.
Good to see you.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.